The Galactic Empire set its sights on Earth, prompting our sole warning the Neptune listening array was never meant to be famous. It was a quiet ring of instruments and small habitats, floating far beyond the busy lanes of Earth and Mars. Most people only remembered it when a science channel needed a calm background story about the edge of human hearing. Out there, the sunlight was thin and pale, and the stars looked sharp, like tiny cuts in black glass. Dr. Alara Voss liked it that way. She stood inside the main analysis room, watching the wall display ripple with long streams of numbers. The room was warm, filled with the soft hum of cooling fans and the faint smell of coffee that had been reheated too many times. 3 other researchers were in the room with her, all focused in their own quiet way. Nobody spoke much unless they had something solid to say. In deep space, words felt expensive. Alara tapped a control and zoomed in on the anomaly. It was small at first glance, a strange repeating bump in the cosmic noise. The universe was full of noise. Any trained person could list 100 causes: star winds, magnet storms, old satellites, even the strange habits of their own sensors. But this pattern did not behave like any of those. It repeated, not like a radio song that loops, but like an idea that returns. A shape in the data again and again, always in the same places, always with the same calm timing. It was too neat, too patient. "Still there?" asked Sato, the station systems engineer, without looking up from his console. Alara nodded. "Still there, same frequency drift, same interval, it's not our equipment." Asha Raman, the youngest member of the team, leaned forward with bright, tired eyes. "If it's not us and it's not a known natural source, it could be an old probe," said Matteo Griggs, their signal specialist. He said it carefully, as if the idea might break if spoken too loudly. "Something human, something forgotten." Alara did not answer at once. Her fingers moved over the controls, pulling different slices of the signal, comparing past recordings, cleaning the data. The anomaly was present in archives from weeks ago, faint but real. It was stronger now. "It's not human," she said finally. "Our probes don't speak like this." Matteo frowned. "Speak." Alara pointed at the display. "Look at the spacing. It's not just repetition. It has structure. It changes in a way that follows rules." Asha swallowed. "Rules like language rules." Alara felt a small tightness in her chest. She had wanted to be wrong. A boring answer was always safer, but the pattern held. "Not words," she said. "Not yet, but it's trying to be understood." They worked in layers like miners digging through rock. First, they removed station noise, then solar interference, then random cosmic bursts. The anomaly remained steady as a heartbeat. Matteo wrote a quick decoder script to test common mathematical signals, prime numbers, Fibonacci, simple base conversions. Nothing fit at first. That was the hardest part, when the brain wanted to force meaning onto shapes. Then Asha made a simple suggestion. "What if it's not starting where we think it starts?" she asked. "What if the first part is missing, like a message that's been damaged?" Matteo blinked. "A broken broadcast." Alara stared at the streams, and her mind shifted angle like a puzzle piece turning. "Try aligning by rhythm instead of amplitude," she told him. "Look for a repeating frame." Matteo ran the test. The display changed, lines snapping into a new pattern. For a moment, the room went very still. The anomaly was no longer a bump. It was a series of tight blocks like pages in a book. A simple header repeated at the start of every block, and behind it was a dense set of symbols, compressed and precise. Sato let out a slow breath. "That's not random." Asha's voice was small. "That's organized." Alara's hands were cold. She pressed her palm against the console, grounding herself. "All right," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "We don't panic, we don't announce anything, we verify." They verified until their eyes hurt. They compared the message across different instruments. They checked time delays. They confirmed it came from beyond Neptune's orbit, from a direction just above the galactic plane, not a local source, not a station echo. When Alara finally allowed herself to accept it, the thought felt like stepping onto thin ice. Someone was sending something into the dark, and Earth had caught a piece of it by accident. They began building a translation path the way first contact scientists had trained for decades. Start with math, build to physics. Show constants that any intelligent species would know. Then, if lucky, the rest would open. Matteo extracted what looked like a key, a repeated table of values that matched known atomic line frequencies. Hydrogen, helium, carbon, a map of the building blocks of matter. Whoever sent this understood the universe the same way humans did. Okay, Mateo said, voice rough with excitement. They're using physics as a dictionary. Alara leaned in. Then we can follow. Hours blurred. The message unfolded like a careful hand opening a folded note. It was not a conversation. It was not asking questions. It was listing. Catalog entries. Each entry followed the same structure. Coordinates, star classification, planet count, a rough estimate of atmosphere composition, and then a set of symbols that looked like status markers. Asha pointed at one marker, the one that appeared again and again in different entries. This one is always at the end, like a conclusion, Mateo nodded, and this other one appears only sometimes, maybe habitable, maybe inhabited. They tested their guesses. The entries with the second marker often had richer detail. The entries without it were shorter, more mechanical. That seemed to fit. Then Alara found the one that made her stomach drop. A bright yellow star, class G8 planets. A third planet with oxygen and nitrogen. Liquid water, a thin ring of satellites around it. Earth. The entry was near the end, almost like the catalog had been updated recently. Next to the Earth entry was a symbol they had not seen before. Asha stared at it as if it could bite. What does that mean? Mateo ran a frequency comparison. It's unique, only appears here. Alara looked away from the screen and out through the small window in the analysis room. Neptune was a distant blue marble, beautiful and silent. Far beyond it was the darkness where this message came from. We need more context, she said. They searched the earlier entries for anything similar. Nothing. They searched for patterns around the symbol, the number of times it was repeated, its position relative to other markers. The symbol sat beside Earth's coordinates like a stamp. Sato, who rarely spoke about anything beyond hardware, asked quietly, "Is it a warning?" No one answered right away. They kept decoding. The next block after the catalog entries was different. It was shorter, written with fewer numbers and more abstract symbols. It felt emotional in a way math usually didn't. The rhythm changed. The repetition was urgent. Mateo extracted a set of translated anchors. Observe, measure, value, comply, archive. Alara read the words slowly, not trusting them. Archive, Asha frowned. Like history. Or like storage, Mateo said. Like putting something away. As they built the mapping, the phrases grew clearer. The message seemed to describe a process, a large power in the galaxy that evaluated worlds, not in a friendly way, not as equals. It measured civilizations like people measured metals, useful or not. Alara felt a hard focus settle into her. This isn't a greeting, she said. Mateo swallowed. It's a report. Asha's hands trembled as she scrolled through the decoded text. Listen, this part. It says evaluation window. Sato leaned closer. Evaluation for what? Asha looked up, eyes wide. For assimilation. The word sat in the air like dust. Alara forced herself to breathe. No, she said, but the message was too structured to be a prank. Too careful to be a mistake. They worked further and a picture formed. A galactic empire, though the message did not use that human phrase, an entity that organized the galaxy by its own rules. It did not always arrive with visible force. Sometimes it arrived with agreements, gifts, systems. It offered order. It offered safety. It offered a place in something bigger. And then, slowly, it replaced what was there before. Asha pointed at a repeated line that appeared in multiple entries. This translates to something like cultural redundancy resolved. Mateo's face went pale. Resolved? Alara's jaw tightened. That's not a friendly word. They found another line attached to worlds that had been resolved. Local identity archived. Administrative language standardized. Planetary output integrated. Asha whispered. So they keep the memory, but they change everything else. Alara heard her own heartbeat. She thought of Earth, its messy politics, its billions of people, its music and jokes and old prayers, its small family dinners and crowded city streets. Could all of that be turned into a clean file inside someone else's library? Mateo scrolled to a section where the message turned personal, or as personal as a signal could be. It showed a sequence of star systems marked with the inhabited marker, and then later the same systems marked with a different ending symbol. Their details shrank over time, like the sender stopped caring about them or was no longer allowed to report. Then a final line appeared, translated as, "If you are hearing this, you are not yet archived." Asha covered her mouth with her hand. Say sat back slowly. So whoever sent this lost their world. Alara stared at the sentence until it blurred. She felt a heavy sadness for a species she had never seen. They had shouted into space as their culture was being packed away. They had built a message that could survive time, hoping someone else would catch it before it was too late. And Earth had caught it. Not because Earth was important, not because Earth was chosen, because Neptune's array was patient and lucky. Alara straightened, forcing her mind into action. "We need to notify Earth," she said. Mateo looked uncertain. "How? The moment we send this, it changes everything. Governments, markets, panic." "We don't send it to everyone," Alara said. "We send it to the proper channels. Scientific First Contact Committees, the UN Outer Space Council. We send raw data plus our best translation notes." Ashaz's voice cracked. "Will they believe us?" Alara looked at her. "They'll have to." She opened a secure line to the station's communications hub. The system demanded authentication layers, fingerprint, retinal scan, station key, and a rotating code that changed every minute. Alara completed each step with steady hands. Before she could send, a new alert flashed on her screen. A burst, not from their outgoing channel. From the same deep space direction as the original message, another block had arrived. Mateo leaned over her shoulder. "It's still transmitting." Alara paused the outgoing message and pulled up the new block. Its header matched the others. But the content was different again, shorter, sharper, a compressed set of coordinates, a timestamp reference based on pulsar timing, and then the same unique symbol that marked Earth's entry, but now it appeared 3 times. Ashaz's voice was a whisper. "It's emphasizing it." Mateo ran a quick decode using the existing key. The translated anchors appeared, and then something new formed from the symbols around them. It took several minutes to resolve, as if the message resisted being read quickly. Finally, the phrase stabilized into basic meaning. "Do not attempt to impress them." Alara blinked. "What?" Mateo read again, then expanded the probable translation. "More like, do not demonstrate power in the way they expect." Ashaz's eyes darted across the screen. "There's more. It says they measure strength. They reward predictable strength, then they own it." Sato frowned. "So if a world builds weapons, they integrate it." Alara felt a cold clarity. "And if a world tries to show off technology, they take it." Another line formed. "They cannot measure what they cannot categorize." Ashaz let out a small breath, half hope and half fear. "So, what can't they categorize?" The message answered, in fragments that were harder to translate. "Not a direct list, but examples. A species that solved conflict by inventing games instead of battles. Another that shared knowledge freely and broke the Empire's control of information. Another that changed their social structure so quickly that the Empire couldn't lock them into a stable role." Alara watched the ideas connect. The sender was not telling Earth to fight. They were telling Earth to confuse the scale itself. Then the block ended with a final sentence that hit Alara like a hand on the shoulder. "Your only defense is to remain more than one thing." Mateo sat back, stunned. That's not a defense plan, that's a philosophy." "It's a warning," Alara said softly, "and advice." Ashaz turned to Alara with desperate intensity. "We have to send this, now." Alara looked at the blinking secure channel, then at the deep space data, then out into the black beyond the station window. Earth was a tiny dot from here, lost among countless lights. But it held everything Alara had ever loved. Old friends, old books, the smell of rain, the sound of crowded streets, the way people laughed at silly things even when life was hard. She did not want Earth to become a neat entry in a cold catalog. She attached the new block to the outgoing packet, along with their partial translation and a clear warning that the interpretation was still evolving. She included the raw signal, the decoding key, and the exact instrument readings so independent teams could verify. Before she hit send, she added one more thing, a short personal note written in plain language to any human who might receive it. "We intercepted a non-human transmission that appears to be a warning about an interstellar power that evaluates and assimilates civilizations. Earth is listed as a target for evaluation. The sender emphasizes that predictable shows of strength may invite control. They suggest our best protection is remaining difficult to categorize." She read it once, then twice, then pressed send. The packet left the station in a tight beam aimed at the inner solar system. It would take time to reach Earth, even at light speed. Not long, but long enough for Alara's mind to fill with imagined outcomes. When the confirmation light turned green, Ashaz sagged in relief as if she had been holding up the ceiling. Mateo rubbed his face with both hands. Saito stared at the screens like he expected them to change into something else. Alara did not relax. She couldn't, not yet. Outside, the universe stayed silent in the way it always had. Neptune's orbit was cold and empty. No ships appeared. No alarms rang. No bright beams cut the darkness. But inside the station, everything had changed. Alara looked at the Earth entry again, at the symbol stamped beside it. She felt an odd mix of fear and responsibility, like she had opened a door that could not be closed. Somewhere far away, beyond any human ship, a system of power was turning its attention toward a small blue world. And here, on a quiet station that nobody cared about, 4 humans had heard the first true sign of it. Alara's gaze hardened with a kind of calm determination. If the galaxy was full of empires and categories and cold measures, then humanity's first response did not have to be panic or pride. It could be thought. It could be choice. And if the warning was true, if the key was to remain more than one thing, then Earth would need more than a single plan. It would need imagination at planetary scale. The next transmission from deep space arrived a few minutes later, faint at first, like a distant heartbeat. Mateo straightened. "Another one?" Alara nodded, already moving. "Then we keep listening." Because the universe had finally spoken back, the message from Neptune reached Earth in a wave of quiet shock. It did not appear on news screens or social feeds. It did not arrive with alarms or flashing banners. It went first to small rooms filled with serious people who had spent their lives preparing for something they never truly believed would happen. In New York, beneath the tall glass building of the United Nations, a secure conference room filled with scientists, diplomats, and translators from every major space agency. The air was cool and still, and the only sound for a long time was the soft tap of fingers on tablets as the raw data from the Neptune array spread across their screens. Dr. Lynn Morales, head of the Planetary Communication Council, stood at the center of the room. She had gray hair pulled into a simple knot and eyes that looked like they had seen too many long nights. She had been part of the team that wrote the first human protocol for alien contact, decades ago. Even then, she had not believed she would ever need it. "This is not a hoax," she said calmly. "The signal structure matches the Neptune station's independent verification. The physics constants are accurate. The pulsar timing confirms the source is far beyond our system." A low murmur moved through the room. A man from the European Space Agency leaned forward. "So someone out there knows we exist." "They may not know us personally," Lynn replied, "but they know Earth is here, and they have marked it." The phrase felt heavy even in simple words. The translation team displayed the catalog entries on the main screen. Lines of symbols became simple shapes, then rough English phrases. The words were not perfect, but the meaning was clear enough to make people shift in their chairs. "Evaluation. Value. Archive." A woman from the Cultural Council whispered, "They talk about civilizations like objects." A younger diplomat asked, "Are we sure this isn't just their way of speaking? Maybe they don't mean harm." Lynn looked at him gently. "Intent is hard to measure across light years. But impact is easier. The sender of this message believes their world was erased in all but memory." Silence followed that. Across the planet, in a quiet office in Beijing, a group of engineers studied the same raw data. In Nairobi, a university team stayed awake all night, checking the math and running their own decoders. In Sao Paulo, a radio observatory turned its dishes toward the same slice of sky, hoping to catch even a whisper of the deep space signal themselves. Within 24 hours, independent confirmation came in. The signal was real. Humanity had not imagined the warning. The question that followed was harder. What now? In the UN chamber, the discussion stretched for hours. Some argued for secrecy, at least until they understood more. Others said the public had a right to know. A few spoke about building defenses, about showing strength, about making it clear that Earth was not an easy world to resolve. Lynn listened to every voice. Then she brought up the last part of the message from Neptune, the line that Alara and her team had translated with such care. "They measure strength, they reward predictable strength, then they own it." The room grew quiet. Lynn spoke slowly. "If this message is even partly true, then acting like a threat or a prize may push us into the very role this empire expects." A man in a dark suit frowned. "So what are you suggesting? We do nothing." "I am suggesting we do something different," Lynn said. We do not speak as one voice. We do not present a single face. The idea felt strange in a room built for unity. Far from the conference rooms, ordinary life on Earth continued. People went to work, children went to school, streets filled with traffic and noise. The sky stayed blue or gray or star-filled, depending on where you stood. Most humans had no idea that their planet had been listed in a distant catalog, but small changes began to ripple. The Neptune array received another block of data, then another. The sender did not speak in full sentences. They sent fragments, examples, short stories compressed into math and symbol. Alara and her team worked non-stop. One message described a world that had tried to impress the Empire with its grand cities and powerful machines. The Empire had praised their efficiency, then integrated their systems into a larger network. The cities remained, but the people no longer chose what they were used for. Another message told of a species that had hidden, gone silent, and tried to avoid notice. The Empire had marked them as non-contributing and absorbed their resources without ever meeting them face to face. But then there were the rare entries that ended differently. One spoke of a civilization that changed its government every few years by design, so there was no stable authority to negotiate with. Another shared a story of a species that refused to use a single language, instead constantly creating new ones through art and music. The Empire had struggled to classify them. Some of those worlds still existed, independent and strange, floating between the Empire's neat lines of control. Asha leaned back in her chair one night, eyes red with tiredness. "They're not telling us how to win," she said. "They're telling us how to stay ourselves," Matteo nodded, "which might be harder." On Earth, the Planetary Communication Council made a bold choice. They went public, not with fear, not with dramatic speeches, with simple facts. A broadcast went out across global networks, translated into hundreds of languages. Dr. Lin appeared on screen, standing in a plain room with no flags behind her. "We have received and verified a non-human signal from deep space," she said. "It appears to be a warning about a large interstellar power that studies and absorbs civilizations. Earth has been listed for future evaluation." The words moved through the world like a slow wave. People stopped in cafes to watch. Families turned up the volume in living rooms. Some laughed nervously, some cried, some immediately began to argue online about what it meant. Lin continued, "We do not know when or how this evaluation may occur. We do not know the full truth of the message, but we believe the sender wanted us to have a choice." She paused, then added, "We will not respond with a single statement or a single plan. We will respond as a world of many voices." The reaction was not calm, but it was not chaos either. Artists began to paint the idea of the galaxy as a place of watchers and wanderers. Teachers asked their students what they would say to someone from another star. Scientists published open letters inviting discussion, not just from experts, but from anyone who wanted to think about the future of humanity. Some governments did begin quiet defense projects, but they did not announce them. Others focused on cultural exchange, on preserving languages, stories, and traditions, as if suddenly aware of how fragile they might be. The idea spread that Earth's strength might not be in a single great machine or weapon, but in its noise, its disagreement, its endless variety. At the Neptune array, Alara watched Earth change through data and delayed broadcasts. "It's like the planet is thinking out loud," Asha said one day. Alara smiled tiredly. "Maybe that's what the sender meant." Another message arrived from deep space. This one was longer, more detailed. It showed a structure that the Empire used to communicate, a vast network of relays and observers that watched whole regions of the galaxy. The Empire did not have a single ruler. It had a system that rewarded efficiency and stability. Over time, it had become a machine that thought in categories and outcomes, not in stories. "They're not evil," Matteo said as they studied it. "They're narrow." "They believe order is kindness," Alara replied, "even if it costs everything else." The message ended with coordinates far from Earth's position, a place where the Empire's observation network was thinner, where the sender believed information could move more freely. Asha looked at the map. "Are they asking us to talk to others?" Alara considered it. "Maybe they're inviting us into a wider conversation." On Earth, Lin and her council debated the same idea. Should humanity try to reach out beyond the Empire's shadow? Should they send a signal of their own, not just in one direction, but in many? In a quiet moment, Lynn stood by a window and watched the city lights below. She thought about how many different lives were happening in those glowing dots. How many different ways there were to be human. If the warning was true, then that messiness was not a weakness. It was a shield. The council decided on an unusual project. Instead of building one great message, they encouraged thousands of small ones. Universities, art groups, radio stations, and even hobbyists were invited to create simple broadcasts using shared mathematical anchors. Not a single voice of Earth, but a chorus. Some messages were scientific, showing equations and star maps. Others were musical, turning human songs into patterns of numbers. Some were stories, translated into basic symbolic forms that described emotion and choice instead of power and size. The sky above Earth filled with quiet beams of light, invisible to the eye but bright in the language of radio. Humanity did not shout. It spoke in many directions, in many ways, about many things. At Neptune, Alara received confirmation that at least some of those signals were reaching the same relay networks that had carried the original warning. "They'll notice," Asha said. "Yes," Alara agreed. "But they won't know how to summarize us." One evening, as the distant stars drifted slowly past the station's windows, a new signal came in. This one did not match the pattern of the sender. It was colder, more precise, less like a story and more like a scan. Mateo's hands moved quickly. "This isn't from our warning source, it's different." Alara felt a familiar tightness in her chest. "The Empire," Mateo nodded. "I think so, it's an observation pulse, it's mapping our broadcasts." The room fell quiet. They watched as the Empire's signal moved through the data streams, touching each human message, measuring frequency, structure, content. The pattern was careful and fast, like a mind that never got tired. Asha whispered, "Are they learning us?" "Yes," Alara said. "But we're not making it easy." Hours passed. The observation pulse faded. Then, unexpectedly, something else appeared. A small, altered echo of one of Earth's messages came back. A simple musical pattern that a group of students in Mexico had sent into space, translated into numbers. The echo was not perfect. It was changed. Mateo stared. "They tried to copy it." Alara leaned forward. "They don't just measure, they imitate." The copied pattern had small errors, like a person humming a song they had only heard once. It wasn't wrong, exactly, but it lacked the feeling behind it. Ashas smiled softly. "They can repeat what we do, but they don't know why we do it." Alara felt a strange, cautious hope. Far away, in the deep structure of the galaxy, something vast and orderly was turning its attention toward a small, loud, confusing world. It was trying to fit humanity into a clean box. And humanity, without a single leader or a single plan, was becoming harder to fit. The warning from a lost world was no longer just a message. It was becoming a movement. And somewhere beyond Neptune, beyond the reach of any human ship, the first true response from the Galactic Empire was beginning to form. Not as a fleet, the question from the deep did not arrive as a sentence. It arrived as a pause. At the Neptune array, Alara noticed it first. The background noise of the universe, the soft storm of radiation and distant stars, had always carried a steady rhythm. But now, in one narrow band of space, there was a gap, a quiet space where there should have been something. "It's like they stopped listening," Asha said, staring at the display. Mateo shook his head. "No, it's like they're listening too closely." The Empire's observation pulse had changed. Instead of sweeping wide and fast, it now lingered. It focused. It returned again and again to the same clusters of human signals, especially the ones that did not follow clear patterns. A group of poets in Ghana had sent a message built from rhythm and silence instead of numbers. A research team in Norway had broadcast a changing set of equations that never repeated in the same way twice. A children's group in Japan had turned a story about friendship into a stream of symbols that shifted every time it was sent. The Empire's signal touched these messages, paused, and moved on. Alara folded her arms. "They're stuck." "On what?" Asha asked. Mateo tapped a section of the screen. "On meaning." On Earth, Dr. Lynn Morales felt the same shift, though she could not see it in waves and lines. She felt it in the tone of the reports coming in from around the world. The first days after the public announcement had been loud and emotional, but now something else was happening. The fear was turning into curiosity. People were not just asking, "What will they do to us?" They were asking, "Who are we to them?" Universities opened free online courses about human history, culture, and language. inviting anyone to join. Artists created giant shared projects where thousands of people added small pieces to a single growing work. Radio stations held open hours where callers talked about what they loved most about being alive. It was messy. It was unorganized. It was very human. Lynn sat in a small meeting room with her council, watching a screen that showed a map of Earth covered in glowing dots. Each dot was a signal being sent into space. "This isn't a strategy," one advisor said. "It's a flood." Lynn smiled faintly. "Sometimes floods change the shape of the land." At Neptune, a new message arrived from the original sender. It was shorter than before, but dense with meaning. "They are watching you more carefully now," the translation suggested. "This is a dangerous moment and a hopeful one." Asha leaned closer. "Why dangerous?" Alara read the next line aloud. "Because they have noticed that you do not behave like a single system." Mateo frowned. "Isn't that what we wanted?" "Yes," Alara said, "but now we need to understand what that means to them." The message continued with a story. It was about a species that had once confused the Empire in a similar way. They had been unpredictable, creative, full of internal differences. For a while, the Empire had observed them without acting. Then it had found a way to simplify them. It offered them a single role: cultural ambassadors. It praised their art and stories. It gave them a place in the wider network where their job was to entertain and inspire others. The species accepted. They felt honored. Over time, their scientists, engineers, and leaders were pulled into that role. Their society began to shape itself around being the creative ones. Other parts of their identity faded. "They were not destroyed," Alara said quietly. "They were narrowed." Asha swallowed. "So the Empire doesn't just take worlds, it gives them boxes to live in." Mateo leaned back. "And once you're in the box, you stop being a problem." On Earth, Lynn shared this part of the message with the Council. "So even being interesting can become a trap," one diplomat said. "Yes," Lynn replied, "if it becomes the only thing we are allowed to be." The room fell silent as the idea sank in. Later that day, Lynn recorded another global broadcast. "We have learned more from the deep space warning," she said. "It suggests that being unique is not enough. Being flexible matters, being many things at once matters." She paused, then added, "So we will not choose a single face for humanity, we will keep changing them." The message spread. In a small town in Canada, a group of engineers started working with local artists to turn math problems into music. In India, farmers recorded stories about their land and worked with programmers to translate them into symbolic form. In Egypt, historians and game designers created interactive star maps that told ancient myths alongside modern science. Humanity's voice into the galaxy grew stranger, richer, and harder to summarize. At Neptune, the Empire's observation pulse began to change again. "It's not just scanning now," Mateo said. "It's responding." Small, clean signals came back. They did not ask questions directly. They mirrored. A pattern of numbers came back that matched a human equation, but with a small improvement. A piece of music returned, simplified into a perfect repeating loop. "They're showing us they can do what we do," Asha said. Alara shook her head. "They're showing us what they think we do." The Empire's copies were efficient, neat, and empty of the small errors and changes that humans kept adding on purpose. Asha smiled a little. "They don't understand why we like the mistakes." One evening, a new kind of message appeared. It did not come from the Empire's usual direction. It came from somewhere else in the galaxy, faint and cautious. Mateo's eyes widened. "This is different, this isn't them, and it's not our warning source." Alara leaned in. "Open it." The signal was weak, like a whisper. It used the same relay network, the same basic physics anchors, but the style was uncertain, like someone copying a language they barely knew. The translation formed slowly. "We have seen you," it said. "We are watching what happens to you." Asha covered her mouth. "Another civilization," the message continued. "We exist within the Empire's network. We cannot speak openly, but your noise has reached us." Alara felt a rush of emotion. They heard Earth. The unknown sender explained that many worlds lived inside the Empire system, classified and assigned roles. Some were trade hubs, some were research centers, some were cultural showcases. Few were allowed to change. "But you are not quiet," the message said. "You do not stay in one shape." They asked carefully if humans were afraid. Alara and her team sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Mateo said, "We should answer." They did not send a grand reply. They sent something small, a simple story told in symbols and rhythm. It was about a group of travelers who could not agree on where to go, so they built a map together and kept changing it as they walked. They ended with a line, "We are afraid, but we are also curious." The reply went out. On Earth, Lynn received notice of the new contact. Her heart raced as she read the translation. Humanity was no longer just being observed by an empire and a lost world. Others were listening. "This is how it spreads," she said to her council. "Not as a rebellion, as a conversation." The empire's signals shifted again. They became more frequent, more focused. The clean patterns began to overlap as if multiple systems were working on the same problem. "They're trying to model us," Matteo said. "Build a version of humanity they can understand." Alara stared at the display. "But which version?" Asha pointed at the data. "All of them, and it's not working." The Empire's models kept breaking. Every time it found a pattern, humans changed it. Every time it built a category, humans blurred it. A group of scientists sent a message that looked like a strict data table. The next day, they sent a poem using the same structure. A music collective broadcast a song, then followed it with a set of physics lessons using the same melody. The Empire's response grew slower. "It's like they're thinking," Asha said softly. "Or stuck," Alara replied. Then the original warning source sent another message. "You are not alone now," it said. "Others are noticing the space you are opening." It warned that the Empire might try a different approach soon. Not observation, not imitation. Invitation. On Earth, Lynn felt a chill as she read that word. An invitation arrived 2 days later. It was clear, strong, and impossible to ignore. It used the same mathematical language as the first warning, but polished, confident. "We acknowledge the presence of Earth," the translation read. "We recognize your complexity. We invite you to join the Galactic network as a node of cultural exchange." Lynn closed her eyes for a moment. The Empire was offering humanity a box. The message promised access to vast knowledge, safe travel routes, protection from unknown dangers. In return, Earth would share its art, stories, and creative output with the wider galaxy. Some in the Council were tempted. "This could be a chance to learn," one said, "to grow." Lynn nodded, "Or a chance to be defined." The debate spread across the world. News channels discussed the offer. Online forums exploded with opinions. Some people dreamed of a future among the stars. Others feared losing something they could not name. At Neptune, Alara watched the human signals change. They did not stop. They did not slow. Instead, new messages began to include the Empire's invitation inside them. Artists turned the invitation into songs that questioned it. Scientists embedded it into equations that showed multiple possible outcomes. Children retold it as a story where the travelers were offered a beautiful city but chose to keep walking. Matteo smiled. "We're answering without answering." The Empire's response was delayed. When it came, it was different. It did not repeat the invitation. It asked a question. "What do you want to be within the galaxy?" The question echoed through the Neptune array, through Earth's networks, through the quiet relays between stars. Lynn stood before the cameras again, but this time she did not speak alone. Around her on screens from every continent, people appeared. Scientists, farmers, artists, teachers, children, elders. She did not give a single answer. She gave 1,000. Some said they wanted to explore. Some said they wanted to protect life. Some said they wanted to tell stories. Some said they wanted to learn. The message went out as a storm of voices, layered and imperfect. At Neptune, Alara watched the Empire's signal slow to almost nothing. Asha whispered, "I think we broke their question." Alara shook her head gently. "I think we showed them a better one." Far away in the ordered systems of the Galactic Empire, a new kind of problem was forming, not a threat to remove, not a resource to integrate, but a presence that refused to stay in one shape. And across the network, other quiet worlds were listening, watching a small blue planet teach the galaxy a strange and simple idea. That being many things at once was not a flaw. It was a form of freedom. The Empire did not answer right away. For the first time since humanity had appeared in its wide systems, there was no clean signal, no perfect pattern returning from the dark. The relays between stars stayed quiet, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. At the Neptune array, Alara watched the empty band of space where the Empire's messages usually flowed. The screens glowed softly, showing only the gentle noise of distant stars. "They're thinking," Asha said. Matteo nodded. "Or changing." On Earth, Dr. Lynn Morales felt the silence like a weight. The world had grown used to the strange comfort of knowing something was watching. Now there was nothing. The council met again, but this time the room felt different. The fear that once filled it had softened into something like patience. They asked us what we want to be, one advisor said, and we told them everything. Lynn smiled slightly. Then maybe now they are trying to understand what that means. The quiet did not stop humanity's signals. If anything, they became more thoughtful. Instead of flooding space with noise, people began to share stories about change. A group of elders in Peru recorded memories of how their town had grown and shrunk over generations. A team of engineers in South Korea sent a message showing how a single idea could become many tools. A school in Kenya created a symbol set that changed shape depending on who used it. The theme was not power, it was growth. At Neptune, a new message finally arrived, but it was not from the Empire's usual channel. It came from the same faint source as the original warning. The translation took longer than usual. The signal was filled with emotion-like patterns, rising and falling in ways that math alone could not easily explain. "They are reacting," Asha said quietly. Alara read the decoded lines. "The Empire is divided." Mateo leaned forward. "Divided how?" Alara scrolled. "Some of their systems believe you should be classified, given a role, and integrated. Others believe you are changing the network itself." Asha's eyes widened. "Just by being here. By refusing to be one thing," Alara said. The message explained that the Empire was not a single mind. It was a structure made of many species, many systems, all bound by rules that had grown over centuries. Those rules were now being questioned. "Some within them are asking why value must be assigned," Alara read. "Why identity must be fixed," Mateo let out a slow breath. "So we didn't just confuse them, we inspired them." On Earth, Lynn received the same update. For the first time, she allowed herself a small, hopeful laugh. "That's how it starts," she said to the council. "Not with a revolution, with a question." Then another message arrived. This one was different again. It was not a broadcast, it was a request. The Empire wanted to send a delegation, not ships, observers. They asked permission to place a small group of representatives near Earth's system, outside the orbit of Neptune. They promised no interference, no control, no changes, only watching and learning. The world reacted in 1,000 ways. Some welcomed the idea, excited by the thought of being truly seen. Others feared it, worried that even observation was the first step toward being shaped. Lynn stood before the cameras once more. "They have asked to come closer," she said. "Not as rulers, not as allies. As students," she paused, "and we must decide if we are willing to be studied without becoming a lesson." The debate lasted days. At Neptune, Alara and her team listened to the arguments through delayed feeds. Asha hugged her knees to her chest one night. "What if this is the trap the warning talked about? What if this is how they find the box to put us in?" Alara looked at the stars. "Then we don't sit still long enough to fit." Mateo smiled faintly. "That seems to be our strategy for everything now." In the end, humanity answered, "Yes, but with conditions. The Empire's observers would not be placed in one location. They would be spread across many orbits, many viewpoints. They would not receive a single, organized stream of human activity. They would see the planet as it was from many angles at many times. The message sent back was simple. You may watch, but you may not summarize." The Empire accepted. Days later, the first observers arrived. They were not ships in the way humans imagined ships. They were small, silent shapes, more like drifting crystals of light than machines. They took positions far from Earth, near Neptune, Saturn, and the wide, dark spaces between. At the Neptune array, Alara saw one for the first time through a telescope. It glowed softly like a frozen star. Asha whispered, "It's beautiful." "And strange," Mateo added. The observers did not speak. They did not send signals at first. They simply watched. They watched human broadcasts. They watched satellites. They watched the quiet movements of the solar system, and something unexpected happened. Other signals began to appear, not from Earth, not from the Empire, from worlds that had been quiet for a very long time. At Neptune, a faint message came in, using the same shared anchors humanity had spread. "We see the Watchers," it said. "We did not know they could watch without taking." Another followed from a different direction. "We have lived as a function for many cycles. You have shown us another way to speak." Alara felt a lump in her throat. The space between stars was filling with whispers. On Earth, Lin read the incoming messages in disbelief. "They're coming to us," one council member said. "Not the Empire, the others." Humanity had become a kind of open door. The Empire's observers noticed this too. After a week of silence, one of them finally sent a signal. It was not clean or perfect. It was hesitant. "We are receiving unexpected communications," the translation read. "This network is changing." Alara laughed softly. "Welcome to the mess." The observer asked, "Is this your intent?" Alara and her team debated how to answer. In the end, they chose honesty. "No," the reply said. "This is our nature." The observer paused for a long time. On Earth, life continued in its small, human ways. People still worried about jobs, weather, family, and food. The galaxy did not solve those problems, but now, sometimes, people looked up at the sky and felt something new: connection. A school in Australia began a project where students wrote letters to whoever is out there, knowing they might never be read. A city in France held a night festival where lights were sent into the sky in patterns meant to show joy, not meaning. Humanity was not performing for the watchers. It was being itself loudly and openly. The original warning source sent another message. "You are doing something rare," it said. "You are not becoming a symbol, you are becoming a space." Mateo frowned. "A space for what?" The answer came in fragments, for others to remember who they were before they were named. At Neptune, Alara stared at the observer's glowing form. "What do you think they see when they look at us?" Asha asked. Alara considered it. "I think they see a system that refuses to settle." The Empire sent another signal, this one more complex. "We have detected changes in multiple nodes of our network," it said. "Cultural roles are being questioned. Classifications are being delayed." Mateo grinned. "Sounds like paperwork problems." Alara smiled. "Sounds like freedom problems." The Empire asked something new. "How do you maintain coherence without control?" Alara read the question out loud. It felt like a mind genuinely trying to learn. She answered carefully. "We don't," the message said. "We argue, we fail, we try again, that is our coherence." The observer did not respond right away. Days passed, then weeks. The galaxy grew louder, not with power, but with voices. Worlds inside the Empire began to send their own small messages, using the shared anchors humanity had spread. They did not rebel. They did not attack. They told stories. They shared memories. They asked each other questions. The Empire's network, once clean and efficient, became crowded with conversations it had never been designed to carry. On Earth, Lin watched reports of this spread. "We didn't plan this," she said. "No," a council member replied. "We invited it." One evening, Lin received a direct transmission from the Empire's central system. It was the clearest message yet. "We are experiencing internal inconsistency," it said. "Our purpose is being reevaluated by our own components." Lin leaned back in her chair, stunned. The Empire, a structure that had shaped galaxies, was questioning itself. The message continued. "You have introduced a variable we did not account for, identity without fixed function." Lin whispered, "We're just being human." The reply came after a pause. "Define human." Lin smiled sadly. "We can't," she said into the microphone. "That's the point." At Neptune, Alara received a private signal from the observer nearest the station. It was not a formal message. It was simple. "I am trying to understand what it is like to change without being commanded." Alara typed back slowly. "It's confusing," she said, "and sometimes painful, but it's also how we grow." The observer responded. "We do not have a concept for growth that is not directed." Alara looked at the stars. "Maybe now you're learning one." The observer's light flickered softly like a thought forming. Far across the galaxy, lines of control and categories were bending, not breaking, bending. The Empire did not fall. It began to listen. And humanity, a small blue world that had once been just a line in a catalog, had become something harder to erase. A place where the galaxy could hear itself speak. The original warning sender sent one last message to Neptune. "You have done more than survive," it said. "You have given us back our names." Alara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the meaning settle. The stars outside the window did not change, but the space between them did, and somewhere in that growing web of voices, the future was no longer being measured. It was being imagined. The galaxy was no longer the same. It had not burned or fallen. There were no battleships streaking through the void, no weapons unrolled to threaten planets. Yet everywhere something was changing. Systems that had once obeyed a single rhythm now whispered. Networks that had counted stars and cataloged civilizations now hummed with uncertainty. Somewhere far from Earth, the Galactic Empire's observers had learned patience. They had begun to wait. On Earth, the world had learned to speak as it never had before. Signals pulsed out from every continent, every city, every research station, all flowing into the vast black. Humans did not send one message. They sent 1,000, sometimes conflicting, sometimes harmonious, sometimes purely playful. They sent laughter, sorrow, curiosity, and fear. They sent questions they did not know the answers to. They sent art in numbers, music in equations, stories in symbols. Dr. Lynn Morales stood once again in the UN conference chamber, the main display showing a live feed of transmissions from every corner of Earth. Around her, the council watched as a global web of signals flowed outward, some colliding, some overlapping, none identical. "Have we overwhelmed them?" one young diplomat asked nervously. Lynn shook her head, a faint smile on her tired face. "No, we have made ourselves impossible to categorize. That is different from overwhelming. They can see us, but they cannot reduce us to a single value, a single pattern, a single box." At the Neptune array, Alara and her team monitored the signals. The observers from the Empire drifted silently near Neptune, near Saturn, and along the distant ice belts. They had begun responding, but their signals were hesitant, minimal. They tried to imitate human transmissions, but something always went wrong. The humans were unpredictable. They had learned to shift, to confuse, to multiply possibilities. The Empire had never encountered a variable like this before. Asha leaned back in her chair, staring at the flickering patterns on the screen. "Do you think they understand yet?" Alara shook her head. "Not fully. They are beginning to grasp the idea, but it will take time." She paused, watching a signal from a small school in Brazil, a message woven from the sounds of rain, laughter, and the hum of city streets. "And that is the point. They will never fully understand. And that is why we are safe." Matteo, ever practical, frowned at the data. "We have to consider the consequences. The Empire could still decide to act. Observation could turn into something else." Alara met his gaze steadily. "Then we continue what we've been doing. We do not act as one. We do not show a single face. We remain more than one thing. That is our defense." Back on Earth, humanity's collective response had become something remarkable. People who had never met now collaborated across oceans and borders, sending small but deliberate messages into the black. Artists, engineers, scientists, students, teachers. They all became contributors to a chorus that was greater than the sum of its parts. In Paris, a group of dancers translated mathematical signals into movement, recording it, and converting the patterns back into light waves sent toward the stars. In Tokyo, schoolchildren mapped stories of their neighborhoods into symbolic shapes that no single observer could decode easily. In Lagos, musicians broadcast the rhythm of daily life, layering city sounds with poetry and the pulse of human hearts. Every message was different. Every message had intention, randomness, and beauty. Lynn watched the reports from Earth's various communication hubs. "They are learning from us," she said, not to anyone in particular. "And yet, they will not be able to own us because we are alive. We are not data. We are not lines in a catalog." A message finally arrived from the Empire's observer group nearest Earth. It was cautious, carefully constructed, but unmistakably different from the previous attempts at clean, detached observation. "We are beginning to understand that humanity does not behave predictably," the translation read. "We are reevaluating our assumptions. Your presence is informative." Matteo let out a low whistle. "Informative? That's terrifyingly polite," Asha laughed softly. "Maybe it's the first time they've ever said that about someone they didn't control." Alara smiled faintly. "Or maybe they have learned something valuable." Meanwhile, other worlds quietly observed. The original sender of the warning sent a message to Neptune that carried joy, something like pride, though it was difficult to translate into human language. "You have not just survived," it said. "You have reshaped the galaxy by showing what it is to remain free." In classrooms and studios on Earth, humanity's own understanding of itself deepened. People were thinking in ways that transcended borders, governments, and even languages. They asked, "What can we share? What must we keep? How do we remain ourselves while still being part of a larger universe?" A new message came from the Empire's central network. It did not issue commands. It did not categorize. It asked a single, simple question. How do you remain coherent without control? The question echoed across Earth. In homes, offices, labs, and fields, humans considered it. It had no obvious answer, but everyone who received it knew it was addressed to them in some small, personal way. At the Neptune array, Alara typed a reply carefully. We do not maintain coherence through order. We do not maintain it through hierarchy or control. We maintain it by listening, by changing, by trying, by failing, by sharing, and by remembering who we are and who we were before we were measured. The observers did not respond immediately. They paused, they analyzed. They sent small fragments back, patterns that suggested hesitation and curiosity. On Earth, Lin spoke to the council. We cannot know how the Empire will respond. But we do know this. They are learning to consider us differently. They are learning that we are not a problem to solve or a resource to consume. We are a presence, and a presence cannot be owned. The galaxy began to shift in subtle ways. Systems that had always obeyed the Empire's classifications sent small signals that were no longer uniform. They experimented, questioned, and slowly began to act in ways that had once seemed impossible. The network that had been rigid, predictable, and ordered now carried the faint hum of life, variety, and creativity. Ashas stared at the patterns on the screen, tracing the lines as they twisted and overlapped. It's beautiful, all the voices, all the variation. It is messy, Alara said, and that is why it works. The Empire sent another message. It was longer this time, a careful explanation. It acknowledged Earth's uniqueness and unpredictability. It admitted that its internal systems had begun to question assumptions, that its classifications had failed to capture the full complexity of humanity. You are a variable that cannot be fully integrated, the translation read. We are learning from you, Mateo whistled softly. Learning, that's progress, Alara nodded, and that is exactly what they cannot control. On Earth, humanity's signals continued to grow. They no longer sent them just to the Empire or the observers. They sent them to empty parts of space, to distant stars, to wherever they might reach. They shared mathematics, music, poetry, stories, and photographs of ordinary life. They sent questions they did not know the answers to, ideas that might confuse and delight anyone or anything listening. The Empire's observers tried to follow, to copy, to analyze. But every time they did, humanity shifted. Messages came in new forms with new structures, new meanings. The observers paused, recalculated, and tried again, and each time they failed to capture the full picture. Alara watched it all unfold. We are teaching them what it is to be alive, she said. They are not used to that, Ashas said quietly. No, Alara admitted. They have never seen a species refuse to be reduced. Then, one day, a new signal arrived from the original warning source. It was a message of joy and gratitude, difficult to translate but unmistakable. You have done more than survive, it said. You have given the galaxy back its freedom to question, to change, to imagine. You have given us back our names. Alara felt a lump in her throat. It is over, she whispered. Mateo shook his head. No, it is just beginning. The Empire's observers sent one last message before leaving their orbits. It was brief. We do not fully understand you. We may never, but we will remember. At Neptune, the team watched the glowing figures drift away, back into the black. They had come to observe, to learn, and they had left changed. On Earth, the world breathed a little easier. People laughed, argued, sang, and created, knowing that their voices mattered not because they had been heard, but because they had not been confined. And somewhere in the vast galaxy, other civilizations paused to listen. They began to send their own small, careful messages, inspired by the unexpected freedom they saw from a small blue planet. Humanity had not conquered with weapons. It had not forced its way into the galaxy. It had done something stranger, more difficult, and infinitely more powerful. It had remained human, and in that choice it had taught the galaxy to pause, to think, to remember. The stars themselves seemed quieter now, as if they had been listening and finally understood that life, in all its messiness and wonder, could not be measured or catalogued. Alara looked out at the endless darkness, dotted with distant fires of stars. She felt a lightness she had never known in her years among the monitors and signals. We changed the galaxy, she said softly. Ashas smiled. Not by force, by being ourselves, Mateo nodded, and that is something no one can take away. From the edge of Neptune's orbit to the farthest reaches of the networked galaxy, the message had been clear. Being more than one thing is the truest form of strength. And Earth, a small blue planet that had once been a simple entry in a catalog, had become the story the galaxy would remember. The Empire would endure, other civilizations would thrive, but the lesson of humanity, its chaos, its variety, its courage to be itself, would ripple across the stars for centuries to come. And the universe, vast and unyielding, had learned what it meant to listen,